There stood a 17-year-old boy in the courtroom, shoulders straight, eyes steady, lips sealed. His suit didn't quite fit right, but it wasn't the clothes that made people stare. It was the fact that he stood alone. No lawyer, no one beside him, just him in a room filled with judgment. The judge looked down at him with tired eyes, a raised brow, and a subtle smirk of disbelief. The murmurs around the room grew louder. "He's representing himself?" someone whispered. Another chuckled. "This'll be over in minutes." But what no one knew, not the judge, not the prosecutor, not even the bailiff who stood at the door, was that this boy wasn't ordinary. He was born in a world that had tried every way it could to break him, bury him, and forget him. And yet here he was, not broken, not buried, and far from forgotten. This is the story of Malik Thompson, a black teenager from the south side of Chicago, a boy raised not by textbooks and tutors, but by sirens and silence, by the sound of gunshots in the distance and the silence of an empty dinner table. A boy who watched the world treat his skin like a threat and his intelligence like a mistake. But Malik, he wasn't like the others, and it wasn't because he was better. It was because he refused to be ignored. He was 5 when he first realized the world didn't work the same for everyone. He remembered holding his mother's hand in a grocery store when a white woman clutched her purse and moved away. At 7, he watched police throw his older brother against a wall for matching a description. At 9, he learned what eviction meant when they came home to find the locks changed and everything they owned in black trash bags outside. By 10, he stopped dreaming about birthday parties or vacations. He dreamed of survival, of one more day without trouble, of a night where no sirens screamed his name. His mom, Vanessa, worked 3 jobs and still came home tired enough to fall asleep standing. His father had disappeared when Malik was just a baby, swallowed by a system that never gave him a second chance. His older brother Jamal was smart, smarter than anyone gave him credit for, but street life didn't offer scholarships. It only offered shortcuts. And those shortcuts came with a price. When Jamal was shot in a drive-by at age 16, something shifted in Malik. He stopped talking to kids at school. He stopped laughing. He started reading, not comics or novels, but case files, legal documents, history books, laws. He would sneak into the local library every day after school, staying until the lights flickered and the librarians begged him to leave. At first, it was curiosity, but soon it became a fire that grew stronger with every unjust headline, every wrongful conviction, every black man paraded across the news as if his life meant nothing. By 13, Malik could quote court decisions most law students hadn't even read yet. By 14, he could take apart arguments made by real lawyers. But he didn't brag. He didn't talk much at all, because no one expected greatness from a kid who lived in a building where the elevator never worked. They expected prison, maybe death, not brilliance. School never felt like home to Malik. Teachers mistook his silence for defiance, his questions for disrespect. He was suspended twice in 8th grade for talking back. Once for correcting a teacher who misunderstood the Constitution. Another time for refusing to stand for a pledge that never protected people who looked like him. He wasn't angry. He was just tired of being silenced, tired of being told to wait his turn, tired of pretending that respect was only owed, never earned. And then came the arrest. He was 16, walking home from the library with 2 books in his backpack, one about civil rights law and the other about wrongful incarceration. A police cruiser slowed beside him. 2 officers stepped out, told him he matched the description of someone who'd just robbed a corner store. He tried to explain calmly. He showed them his school ID, told them where he'd been. But they didn't care. One officer grabbed his bag, the other grabbed his wrist. He was on the ground in seconds, face pressed to concrete, books spilling beside him. They found no weapon, no money, no stolen goods, but they took him in anyway. He spent the night in a holding cell that smelled like fear and sweat and mold. He didn't cry, not because he wasn't scared, but because crying felt like surrender. And Malik didn't know how to surrender. The charges were dropped the next day. The store owner confirmed it wasn't him. But that didn't fix what was broken. That didn't erase the humiliation, the bruises, the looks, or the record. From that day forward, Malik stopped waiting for help. He knew the system wasn't built for him. It was built to trap him. So he started preparing. quietly, fiercely, patiently. He knew he'd need to be 10 times better just to be seen as average, and that's exactly what he planned to be. Better, smarter, unstoppable. And then came the case. The one that would put him in that courtroom alone. His friend Marcus had been caught up in a petty theft ring, stealing phones from locker rooms. Malik had nothing to do with it, but they found his fingerprints on one of the lockers. It didn't matter that he used that same locker during practice. It didn't matter that there were no stolen items on him. It didn't matter that he had an alibi. They needed a name, a case, a face, and Malik fit the description. He couldn't afford a lawyer. His mother barely had enough to pay rent. Public defenders were overloaded, drowning in files and cases and deadlines, so Malik made the decision. He'd represent himself. People laughed. The judge scoffed. The prosecutor barely hid his smirk. But Malik didn't blink, because he had been preparing for this his whole life. While others played video games, he was studying precedents. While others chased parties, he was reading closing arguments from historic trials. He wasn't a law student, but he thought like one, argued like one, fought like one. And when the trial began, Malik didn't flinch. He addressed the court with poise and confidence. He cited laws and previous judgments with precision. He exposed flaws in the evidence, contradictions in witness statements, and bias in the prosecution's timeline. He brought logic where they had assumptions, facts where they had prejudice. By the third day of the trial, the smirks were gone. The judge no longer mocked him. The prosecutor no longer underestimated him. The court was silent, not because they respected him, but because they feared they had been wrong about him. He wasn't a joke. He wasn't a boy pretending to be a man. He was a force they didn't see coming. And still he never raised his voice. He never lashed out. He let the law speak for him. Because in that courtroom, Malik wasn't just defending himself. He was defending every black kid who had ever been told they weren't good enough. Every child who'd ever been silenced, overlooked, criminalized, ignored. He was fighting for a chance, for a future, and deep down, for justice. As the second week of the trial began, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted. The laughter had faded. The judge no longer looked amused. The audience, who had once smirked at the thought of a teenager acting as his own attorney, now leaned in with quiet awe. What had started as a circus had become a clinic. Malik stood, as always, calm and composed. His voice was measured, steady, not because he lacked emotion, but because he had trained himself to control it. Because the courtroom didn't reward passion from boys like him. It punished it. He presented evidence the state had overlooked or had chosen to ignore. He questioned the lab's fingerprint analysis, showing how the locker in question had never been swabbed properly. He pointed out that his prints could have been there from days prior, since he was a regular in that building. No one had bothered to verify timestamps. Then he did the unthinkable. He cross-examined the officer who arrested him. With sharp, deliberate questions, Malik exposed inconsistencies in the officer's report. He showed how the timeline didn't add up, how the so-called surveillance footage had gaps, how the arrest happened just minutes after a conversation with another officer who had previously stopped him without cause. It wasn't just poor policing, it was a pattern. And the court heard it, loud and clear. The prosecutor, once cocky and dismissive, was now scrambling. He underestimated Malik. They all had. But what hurt them most wasn't that the boy was smart, it was that he was smarter than them. Malik didn't just understand the law, he understood the system, its traps, its tricks, its double standards. And he used that knowledge not as a weapon, but as a shield. He wasn't fighting dirty, he was fighting fair, something the system had rarely offered him. Outside the courtroom, word had spread. Local reporters began covering the trial. Social media posts went viral. Teen defends himself, shocks everyone in court became the headline on dozens of pages. Video clips surfaced showing Malik calmly breaking down legal jargon with the ease of a seasoned attorney. People began showing up just to see him speak. And for the first time in his life, people weren't looking at him as a problem. They were looking at him as a miracle. But none of that mattered to Malik, because for him, this wasn't about fame. It was about freedom. Not just his, but for every black boy who'd ever been accused before being heard, judged before being known, sentenced before being understood. On the final day of the trial, Malik delivered his closing statement. He didn't read from notes. He didn't stumble or hesitate. He spoke from memory, from pain, from purpose. He talked about what it meant to grow up being feared instead of protected, about what it meant to be brilliant in a world that tried to dim your light. He reminded the court that this case wasn't just about a stolen phone, it was about a stolen narrative, a stolen future. He ended with this, open quote, "I may not look like what you expect an attorney to look like, but I know the law because the law has shaped every day of my life. It was there when my brother died. It was there when I was falsely arrested, and it's here now, not to break me, but to let me finally be heard." Close quote. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked moved. His once skeptical gaze had softened. And then, the verdict. The jury found him not guilty, unanimously. There was no cheering, no dramatic outburst, just a long, heavy silence filled with disbelief, respect, and something else that rarely existed in that room. Hope. Malik stepped out of the courtroom a free man. But more than that, he stepped out as a symbol, not of perfection, not of some fantasy, but of possibility. A black boy from a forgotten block had walked into a courtroom alone, unprotected and disrespected. And he left it having changed everyone's expectations. Forever. Later that week, the judge who once mocked him made a public statement. He admitted that he had judged the boy by his appearance, not his ability. He called Malik's self-defense one of the most remarkable displays of legal understanding he had ever seen. Law firms called, universities offered scholarships, interviews were requested, but Malik turned most of them down because he had a different mission now. He wanted to help others like him. Boys and girls trapped in cycles they didn't create. He began mentoring kids in his community, teaching them their rights, guiding them through the system, helping them fight back with intelligence, not rage. Because he had learned something powerful. Open quote. "The world may try to silence you, but if you learn to speak their language, you can make them listen. And once they listen, they can no longer ignore you." What? Close quote. Malik never became famous. He didn't chase wealth or spotlight. But in the corners of his city, where hope was scarce and injustice abundant, his name meant something. It meant you don't have to wait for a hero. You can be one. Final words. This was never just about a court case. It was about a boy who dared to believe that knowledge could be power, even in a world that tried to strip him of both. Malik's story reminds us that genius has no dress code, that bravery has no age, and that justice, though delayed, can still be delivered, even when it comes in the voice of a 17-year-old black boy who refused to be silenced.